She didn't ask him to come in. That was the first thing he noticed. The door to the medbay was open, cracked 3 inches, maybe 4, the hinge seal hissing softly from the pressure differential, and through that gap he could see her. Sira Voss, lying on the recovery cot with one arm trailing off the edge, her fingers nearly touching the deck plate. The IV line running from her wrist glowed faint amber in the dark. Her eyes were open. She was staring at the ceiling, which was just raw bulkhead, nothing to look at, nothing to see. He stood in the corridor and did the math. 31 hours since she'd been carried off the surface of Coravel on a stretcher made of 2 pulse rifle stocks and a pressure tarp. 22 hours since the ship's medic, a Breathkai field surgeon named Orvik who smelled like rust and worked with 4-fingered hands in quiet, focused silence, had come out of the bay and said, plainly and without sentiment, that the patient had asked him to let her die. She said it clearly, Orvik had told him. No ambiguity. I have logged her refusal of treatment. In our tradition, this is how it is done. The sick choose. The healer steps aside. Callum Nash had stared at the surgeon for a long time. Then he'd walked to the galley, pulled out the last real flour packet he'd been saving since Callisto's station, and started cooking. Orvik had watched him from the doorway. You did not hear what I said. I heard you fine. She has the right to. She's got a traumatic brain bleed, 3 cracked ribs, a fractured eye socket, and about 40% of the capillaries in her left lung doing whatever they want, Callum said, not looking up from the pan. She's also been awake for 60 hours straight and just watched everyone else on her team get killed. I'm going to take her some food. Nash, I'm not a healer, I'm just making dinner. Orvik had stared at him with those compound lens eyes that the Breathkai used for surgery, designed to see microscopic trauma, designed to find the thing that was trying to kill you. And whatever he saw in Callum Nash's face must have looked familiar to those lenses, because he stepped aside. That had been 9 hours ago. Now Callum stood in the corridor with a bowl in each hand, the smell of actual food threading through the medbay door, and he knocked on the frame with his elbow. I know you told Orvik to let you go, he said. I'm not here about that, I made too much. You want some. Silence from inside. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and went in anyway. She'd been part of the Coravel delegation for 18 months, which meant she'd been living inside the Trellian Compact longer than most humans had ever managed. The Trellians were not hostile. That was the thing people got wrong. They weren't hostile. They were simply so thoroughly convinced of their own correctness that hostility hadn't occurred to them. The way a mountain doesn't think about the river running around its base. The river goes where it goes. The mountain doesn't notice. Sira Voss had noticed. She'd spent 18 months in the Compact's colonial administrative towers, learning the 7 formal registers of Trellian speech, attending the ceremonial dissolution hearings where the old power holders passed their authority to successors, drinking the bitter pressbark drink they served at functions and not making a face, and building, very slowly, very carefully, a working trust with a man named Consul Athrin, who was both the most powerful human sympathetic voice in the Compact's governing structure and the most likely target for everything that was about to go wrong. The thing that went wrong was called the Vrethic Conclave. Callum didn't fully understand the Vrethic. He understood them the way you understand a weather system, at the level of what they do, not what they are. What they did was this. They found civilizations in transition, moments when power was being transferred, when the new keeper of a thing was not yet the old one, when the gap between one age and the next was just wide enough to slip a blade into. They operated through proxies. They found the person in the power structure who was most afraid of loss, always love-based fear, always the fear of losing a specific person rather than the fear of losing status, and they made that person a promise. The promise was never real. The delivery mechanism was a small device worn at the base of the skull, threaded directly into the limbic cortex, And by the time the person realized they were wearing a leash instead of a lifeline, the Vrethik were already inside the compound. The proxy on Coravel had been a woman named Consul Larais, who had loved Athrin for 11 years and was terrified that his elevation to primary keeper would take him away from her forever. The Vrethik had given her a silver filament, barely visible, nested in the lace collar she wore to every function. She thought she was protecting him. By the time Sira Voss understood what was happening, Larais had locked down the administrative complex, called for the arrest of Athrin and every human national on the planet, and handed compact access codes to something that was not, as it turned out, a diplomatic envoy. It was a ship. It had been parked in the grove of memory trees at the eastern edge of the ceremonial quarter for 3 months, disguised as a memorial structure, and nobody had questioned it because nobody questioned the memory trees. The Trellians did not question their rituals. You didn't touch the memory trees. You didn't alter what lived in the grove. You left offerings sometimes. You made sure the moss was clean. You were, in your own gentle Trellian way, extraordinarily kind to something that was slowly poisoning you. The ship had opened. What came out wasn't Vrethik leadership. It was something older, something that wore Vrethik technology the way a parasite wears a host, using the conclave as an instrument, a ladder, a set of hands that could be discarded once the prize was reached. It called itself the Ascendant. It had a face that had once been a face and was now something that had outlived its architecture, flesh held together by machinery and malice, one eye perfectly functional and the other a flat lens that recorded everything and felt nothing. It was on its last body. It needed a new one. And it had spent 40 years maneuvering itself into position to take the Trellian source, the planet-scale bionetwork that ran through Cora Vel's bedrock like a nervous system, connecting every living Trellian to every other, the seat of their collective consciousness, the thing that made them who they were. With the source, it could rewrite itself, take any form, live any number of additional lifetimes. Without it, it had maybe 6 months. Sira Voss had known all of this for approximately 4 hours before the administrative complex went into lockdown. She tried to warn Athrin. Larais had ordered her arrested before she could reach him. The team she was with 5 humans, 3 Brethkai liaisons, a Trellian junior consul who'd been sympathetic to the delegation, had been caught in the crossfire when the Vrethik perimeter forces moved in. She'd watched people die. She'd been hit by a ricocheting pulse burst somewhere in the evacuation, which was when things went blurry. She'd gotten 3 of them out. She'd collapsed in the exfil vehicle. Orvik had kept her alive through re-entry. And then she'd woken up and told him to stop. Callum set the bowl on the small tray stand beside her cot, pulled the medbay's single stool to the foot of the bed, and sat down with his own bowl in his lap. The food was simple, reconstituted grain base, a handful of dried keth leaf that one of the Brethkai crew kept in his locker, a stock cube that was supposed to approximate something from Earth, but had always tasted more like the idea of soup than soup itself. He put actual salt in it. He had a small paper packet of actual salt from a market on Callisto, and he'd used a third of it on 2 bowls of terrible reconstituted grain, because that was where they were. She didn't say anything. She was watching the bowl. The smell was doing something to her face that she wasn't quite controlling. Orvik says you told him to step aside, Callum said. I know what I told him. I'm not arguing. I just wanted to say I heard you. Then why are you here? Because I made too much. He ate a spoonful. It was bad, but not as bad as it could have been. The keth leaf helped. Orvik's portion is staying warm in the galley. He can have it later. I made yours because I figured even if you don't want it, the smell might be worth something. She looked at him for a long moment. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut from the orbital fracture, and the undamaged right eye was doing the work of both, tracking him with the kind of sustained focus that came from too many hours spent on too little sleep in too much danger. You know what it cost, she said. Coravel, you know what we lost there. I know. Atherin is still in that complex. Lares has the compact security apparatus. The Ascendant has control of the source access protocols, which means it's only a matter of time before. I know. And you think soup helps? Soup doesn't help, Callum said. Soup is just soup, but you haven't eaten in 2 days and your body is trying to repair 3 kinds of damage simultaneously, and that requires fuel, and right now this is the fuel I have. He paused. Also, the Keth leaf is genuinely good. The Breathkai crewman who keeps it is named Eric and he's protective of his stash, so this is a limited edition situation. She almost did something with her mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the thing that happens just before a smile, the moment where the architecture of a face considers smiling and then decides to wait and see. You're an idiot, she said. Possibly, Callum agreed. Bowl's right there. She didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at the ceiling for a while. He ate his soup and didn't push. The ship made its usual sounds, the low harmonic thrum of the Kavik pattern drives, the occasional click and settle of the hull under pressure differential, the very distant sound of Orvik moving around in the forward compartment. Normal sounds. We are still here sounds. They were all so kind to it, Sira said eventually to the ceiling. The Trellians, to the Ascendant ship sitting there in their grove. They put offerings at the base of it. They cleaned the moss off its hull. They made sure it was comfortable. They are the most genuinely kind civilization I have ever encountered, and they were being patient and gentle with the thing that was going to consume them. Callum didn't say anything. In Lares, she wasn't evil. I need you to understand that. She wasn't evil, she was in love, and she was afraid of losing someone, and the Vrethik found that fear and they put a collar on it and called it hope. Her right eye was wet at the corner. She didn't acknowledge it. The collar did the rest. By the time she understood what she'd given access to, she was already the instrument, already the key in the lock. We're going to get her out, Callum said. You don't know that. No, but it's the working assumption. He set his empty bowl on the deck. Orvik's been awake for 20 hours. Eric and the crew are holding position in the outer belt. We have a route back into the compound that Atherin gave me before the lockdown, emergency consular access, bypasses the Vrethik security grid entirely. We have 2 people on the inside who have not been rounded up yet. He looked at her. We need a 3rd. Silence. Specifically, he said, we need someone who speaks all 7 registers of Trellian and who Consul Atherin trusts enough to hand source access controls to in an emergency. More silence. That's you, he said, in case it wasn't clear. Sira Voss turned her head slowly toward the bowl of soup on the tray stand. She looked at it for a long time. Then she reached out with a hand that didn't have the IV line, the right hand, steady despite everything, and picked it up. This is actually going to require me to not be dead, she observed. That was my general hope, yes. For the record, she said, I was aware of that implication when I made the original request. I know. I just want it noted. Noted. She ate. Orvik discharged her 31 hours later, under protest, with a cortical stabilizer taped behind her left ear and a stern list of activities that would cause him, he said, considerable professional irritation if she engaged in them. She listened to the list, thanked him, and asked Callum to meet her in the equipment bay in 10 minutes. He found her there already, standing at the weapons locker in her field kit, running a diagnostic on a compact pulse emitter with the kind of focused, efficient calm that he'd seen in people who'd recently been very close to the edge and had decided, for specific reasons, to come back. She'd eaten twice more during the recovery window. He'd brought both meals. She hadn't asked him to, and she hadn't commented on it, and he hadn't made it a thing. It was just meals. It was just the practical fact that she had work to do, and work required fuel, and fuel required someone to produce it. Tell me the access route, she said. He told her. She listened without interrupting, turning the pulse emitter over in her hands, not pointing it at anything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Atherin will be in the primary keeper's chamber," she said. "The Ascendant will have him there. It needs a Trellian to access the source biointerface. The system only responds to native biological signatures. So it's keeping Atherin alive and it's keeping him accessible." She looked up. "But Larais will be the keeper in name. The Vrethik installed her. The ceremony was completed. She is formally the holder of the source authority, which means the source answers to her, not the Ascendant directly. The Ascendant needs Larais to act as the key. The collar makes sure she does what she's told." Sira's jaw tightened. "But the collar is a Vrethik device. It operates on a specific frequency override signal. If we can transmit the counter frequency, Larais is free. And if Larais is free, she revokes the source access she granted. The Ascendant loses everything it came for." She set the pulse emitter down on the locker shelf. "We need to get the counter frequency to her, and we need to get it to her without the Vrethik ground forces intercepting the transmission. Which means someone needs to be in physical proximity to her." "Within about 12 meters, Sira agreed. "The collar's shielding is too dense for anything weaker than a point source transmission." She looked at him with her one good eye, the orbital fracture still livid and purple around the other, the cortical stabilizer blinking soft green behind her ear. "Atherin's emergency access brings us in through the lower sanctum corridor. It comes out 40 meters from the primary keeper's chamber." 40 meters. From there it's a straight walk through 2 ceremonial anterooms. Vrethik ground forces will have the outer perimeter. The inner sanctum will have compact security, but they're Trellian and they're operating under coercion, not genuine alignment. She picked up the pulse emitter again. "Trellian security, given a clear indication that their consoles will has been subverted, will stand down." "You're betting on that?" "I'm betting on 18 months of watching how they think." She met his eyes. "They are not the kind of people who remain instruments when the instrument is broken. The moment Larais is free, the moment she herself says stop, they'll stop." He thought about the soup, about leaving the door cracked, about the moment Sira had reached for the bowl with her right hand, steady and deliberate, having decided something. "All right," he said. The emergency access route Atherin had given him was a series of subsurface corridors that predated the compact's current administrative architecture by several hundred years. They ran beneath the ceremonial grove, through the root zone of the memory trees, which meant the biosphere here was saturated with the residual field energy of every Trellian who had ever stood above in the grove, generation after generation, leaving their memories in the root network like sediment. The air tasted like stone and deep time. Their boots made almost no sound. Orvik was with them. He had presented himself at the airlock in full field kit, said nothing, and waited to be told he wasn't coming. Callum had considered it for about 2 seconds and said nothing. Eric and 2 others were holding the ship at extraction range. Callum had given Eric a window, 6 hours from insertion. The corridor branched. Sira moved to the left branch without checking the map. She'd memorized it during the recovery window, apparently, along with everything else she'd processed while lying in the medbay staring at the ceiling. He followed. "The Vrethik found Larais because they were looking for love," Sira said quietly as they moved. Not a non sequitur, he understood she was still processing, still turning the event over. "They run assessments on every power transition target population. They look specifically for the person most afraid of losing someone specific. It's always specific. It's never abstract fear. The abstract ones can be argued with, reasoned with, redirected. But specific fear, that thing about that person, the terrifying specificity of caring about one individual life, that they can work with. They use it as a lever," Callum said. "They use it as a door. The fear is already there. The love makes the fear, they just knock." She paused at a junction, oriented herself by something on the wall, a carved symbol, old compact heraldry, and went right. And the person opens the door because they think they're protecting the thing they love. And they end up being the instrument of its destruction. Always, her voice was level, factual, because the Vrethic's promise is never real. They can't give you what you want. They can only borrow your willingness to believe they can. The ground ahead of them vibrated faintly. Structural resonance from above, mass movement, probably Vrethic perimeter rotation. Sira raised a hand. They stopped. Orvik adjusted the strap of his kit without being asked. The vibration passed. They moved on. The lower sanctum corridor opened through an archway behind a tapestry of woven light thread, one of the ceremonial hangings that lined the inner sanctum's anteroom walls. The anteroom was empty. The second anteroom was not. 2 compact security officers were positioned at the primary keeper's chamber entrance, Trellians, in the layered gray and copper uniform of the Fosters, the compound's formal guardians. They were armed with standard pulse lances, held at attention, visors down. They did not react immediately to the 3 figures stepping out from behind the tapestry, which meant the lower sanctum was genuinely off their grid, genuinely unknown to the Vrethic's repositioning of compact security. Which also meant no one had told these 2 officers to watch for people coming in from below. Sira walked toward them at a pace that was neither aggressive nor furtive. Just here, moving with purpose, wearing the field kit of a human diplomatic liaison who was having a specific kind of terrible day. "I am Sira Voss," she said, in the second register of formal Trellian, the register of respected but not superior, peer-to-peer, I see you and I am seen. A register that the Trellians used exclusively when they wanted to say, I am treating you as my equal. I am not giving you an order, I am asking you to choose. Liaison first tier to Consul Athrin's delegation. I need to speak with Consul Larais. The left officer's visor flickered, a micro-expression. The compound is in security lockdown. I know, that's why I need to speak with her. Not to oppose the lockdown, to offer her something. Sira reached into the chest pocket of her kit and produced a small device, the counter-frequency emitter, which looked from a distance like a standard compact communications peg. She is wearing a Vrethic neural collar. The filament configuration is in my records. I have the counter-frequency signal. She held the device up steady, not threatening. Just, here, visible, this is what I have and I am showing it to you. The collar is controlling her actions. I think you know something feels wrong. I think that's why you're standing here and not in the outer perimeter where the Vrethic want the Fosters. The right officer looked at the left, a long look. The kind of look that said, we talked about this. We've been talking about this since they put the collar on her. We knew something was wrong. The left officer's visor came up. She was young, younger than Callum had expected. Her face was doing the thing where certainty and fear were running a very close race. She ordered us not to admit anyone, she said. Not in the lockdown register, in the second register. That's not Larais. She doesn't speak to us that way. She's been with the Fosters for 11 years. She knows our names. Her jaw was tight. Whatever is happening in there with her voice, it's not her. No, Sira said, it's not. The officer stepped aside. Larais was standing at the center of the primary keeper's chamber, elevated on the ceremonial dais in the full regalia of a compact keeper, the layered brocade, the formal crown ring of office, the light-threaded sash, and she looked, from a distance, like the image of authority. She looked like the thing the Vrethic had placed her here to look like. She looked like what the Ascendant needed her to be. From closer, her hands were wrong, too still. The stillness of something being held in place. Her eyes moved when Callum, Sira, and Orvik entered, moved immediately, tracked to them with an urgency that her face was not allowed to express. The collar was working. The collar was keeping the architecture of authority in place, but her eyes were fighting it. In the chamber's far corner, Athrin, Consul Athrin, primary keeper designate, the man Sira had spent 18 months protecting, was seated in a restraint field, perfectly immobile, watching. His eyes found Sira's across the chamber, and he went very still in a different way. The stillness of someone who has been in terrible circumstances for a long time and has just seen something that might mean the circumstances are changing. And there, in the chamber's center rear, at the biointerface console of the source, the actual source, the planet network pulsing in its containment architecture like a slow blue heartbeat, was the Ascendant. It looked worse in person. The flesh-over machinery quality of it was more apparent in direct light, the places where biology had been replaced or supplemented or simply given up and let the chassis show through. One hand was real. The other was a mechanism that moved like a hand. The eye that recorded everything tracked them across the room, and the other eye, the remaining organic one, older than it had any right to be, dense with whatever had kept this thing running through body after body after body, fixed on Sira Voss and recognized something. "You died on the exfiltration," it said. Its voice was smooth. It had a good voice, the voice of someone who had learned centuries ago that a good voice was a tool like any other. "I had confirmation of your vital cessation." "Your confirmation was wrong," Sira said. Evidently, it studied her. "You are here for the collar, you have a countersignal. I am familiar with your type of reasoning. You believe that if you free the compact keeper from her behavioral constraints, she will revoke my access to the source, her people will stand down, and the situation resolves." It tilted its head. The mechanical hand flexed. "You are correct that this is what would happen. You are incorrect in your belief that I will allow it." "We outnumber you," Callum said. "You have 3 organic bodies, one of which is still recovering from significant trauma, and a pulse emitter that is calibrated for Vrethic field armor, which I am not wearing." It turned the full weight of that old eye on him. "I have lived longer than your civilization's recorded history. I have watched species that looked at me across a room and thought what you are thinking now, and I have outlasted every single one of them. I will outlast you. I will take a new body today, or I will take one next year, or the year after. What I will not do is die here, in this chamber, because 3 humans and a Breathkai surgeon walked through a corridor that my people failed to monitor." The chamber was quiet. Callum thought about something the keeper of Traken had said, not the actual keeper, not Athrin, but the old story Sira had told him once, months ago, on a late transit shift when neither of them could sleep. The story of a dying keeper who had reached out across the dark to find help, knowing the risk, knowing the danger, knowing he was asking someone to walk into a situation they might not walk out of. "Think carefully before you agree," the old keeper had said in the story. "There is great danger in this." And the traveler had said, "Anything I can do." And then the young one had said, the young one who hadn't been a companion yet, who was just a scientist's daughter standing in a corridor with a borrowed energy weapon, figuring out what she was willing to do, she'd said. "Goes for me, too." Not the grand gesture, not the speech. Just me too, I'm here, I've decided. Callum had a flash grenade in his left jacket pocket. He'd had it since the exfil. He'd been carrying it for 2 days like a thought he hadn't finished yet. His left hand moved toward it. The Ascendant's recording eye tracked the movement. And Sira Voss threw the counter-frequency emitter to Larai's. Not toward her, not near her. She threw it directly at her, hard and flat, across the chamber, an overhand throw that any baseline human could have made or missed, and Larai's hands moved. They moved in direct contradiction to every behavioral constraint the collar was running, some substrate of self that the Vrethic algorithm had not been able to fully reach, rising up through the suppression like a hand through water, and she caught it. The Ascendant moved. Callum pulled the flash grenade and threw it at the floor between the Ascendant and the dais. The chamber went white. In the ringing aftermath, in the 3 seconds of visual overload that the grenade bought, Sira was already moving not toward the Ascendant, not toward the console, toward Larai's, closing the distance, reaching for the woman's collar with both hands and finding the filament where she'd said it would be, at the base of the skull, nested in the lace, and speaking in the third register this time, the intimate register, the one Trellians used only for honesty. "Hold still, I have you, I'm taking it off." The filament came free. Lairai's made a sound that had no linguistic category. It was the sound of a door coming off its lock, of something that has been held still for a very long time suddenly being permitted to move. She folded forward and Sira caught her, both of them going to one knee on the dais, and the compact keeper pressed the counter-frequency emitter in her palm, still caught in the reflex of the throw, still held in hands that had just remembered they were her own. The Ascendant's visual field cleared. It turned toward them. "Revoke," Atherin said, from inside the restraint field, his voice cracked from hours of not speaking. "Lairai's, revoke the access." Lairai's raised her head. Her eyes were streaming. Her hands were shaking. She was looking at Atherin across the chamber with the specific quality of someone seeing a thing they had been convinced was already lost. She pressed the emitter. The signal went out. The source biointerface at the Ascendant's console went dark. What happened next was fast and messy and not particularly dramatic, the way real things usually are. Orvik put a surgical field stun on the Ascendant before it could complete whatever sequence it was running on its internal systems. A field stun that, he noted calmly, he had calibrated specifically for the Ascendant's physiological profile because he had spent the transit reviewing Vrethic biological literature and had been prepared for this eventuality even when he had said nothing about it. The Ascendant went down. It was not dead. That was a problem for people with more equipment and authority than any of them, and Callum flagged it for the Union Treaty Office as they were leaving. The compact Fosters, both of them, from the anteroom, came in when the signal changed. They moved directly to Lairai's. The younger one, the one who had stepped aside and looked afraid, went to her knee beside the console and held her hand and said her name, the way you say the name of someone you've been worrying about. Lairai's said, I know, I'm sorry, not because it was her fault, just because she needed to say it to someone." Atherin's restraint field shut down automatically when the source access was revoked. He stood up slowly, with the stiffness of someone who has been sitting in a fixed position for a very long time and didn't fully know until now whether he would ever stand up again. He crossed the chamber and stood in front of Sira Voss and said, in the second register, the equal ICU register, "You were told to let yourself die." "I was offered that option," Sira said. "And someone made soup," she glanced at Callum. "It was bad soup, but it was made by someone who was paying attention, and I decided that was worth something." Atherin looked at Callum Nash, the way the Trellians looked at things they found genuinely interesting, taking the full measure, weighing. "In our tradition," Atherin said, "when a keeper is dying and they reach out into the dark to find help, the help does not always come. The risk is too great. The danger is too real. Most who could help choose not to." "Sure," Callum said. "You chose otherwise." "I made dinner." "That's a lower bar than whatever you're describing." Atherin made a sound that Callum had learned, in the months he'd been working alongside the Trellian delegation, was approximately equivalent to a human laugh. Not quite. The architecture of it was different, but the same feeling underneath. They were back on the ship in 4 hours. The extraction window had been held. Eric had not moved the vessel despite receiving no updates, which Callum noted he was going to have some feelings about and then not have them because it had worked out. The Ascendant was in compact custody. A Union Treaty team was en route. Lairai's was in a compact medical facility, attended by 2 Fosters who had not left her side, the filament removed and the collar in an evidence lockbox and her hands finally her own. Orvik was in the medbay with Sira, running a post-mission cortical scan and issuing, based on the amount of speech audible through the closed door, a list of recovery requirements that was considerably longer than the pre-mission one. Callum sat in the galley with 2 mugs of something hot. Not coffee. The ship had been out of coffee for 6 weeks, but a breathkai stimulant drink that Eric had once described as what coffee dreams it could be, which was overstating it, but which was warm and present and available. He set 1 mug outside the med bay door. He heard Orvik stop talking mid-sentence. A pause. "Is that the Kethleaf again?" Sierra's voice from inside, still husky, still carrying the evidence of everything. "Some of it." A longer pause. "I'm going to be a few more minutes." "No rush," Callum said. "I'm not going anywhere." He sat down on the corridor deck, back against the bulkhead, his own mug between his hands, and listened to the ship make its sounds. The drives, the hull, the ordinary mechanical continuity of a vessel moving through space, not broken, not on fire, currently in the process of continuing to exist. Through the porthole at the corridor's end he could see the outer belt of Coravel, the ring of slow-moving debris that the planet wore like an old scar, remnants of some ancient collision that had happened before the Trellians arrived, before anyone was keeping records. The debris caught the system's star at the edge of its arc and made small, brief lights, each one distinct, each one just a rock turning in the dark. But from here, through a porthole, from the right angle, they looked like something worth watching. He was watching them when the med bay door opened, and Sierra came out barefoot, with the cortical stabilizer still blinking behind her ear, and Orvik's mug in her hand. She sat down on the deck beside him without being invited, because the invitation was the mug already there, and the space already made, the way some things don't need to be said. "Atherin's going to want a full debrief," she said. "Tomorrow. There's a lot of treaty work. The Vrethic had hands in 4 other compact systems. We found the access logs on the Ascendant's TARDIS." "It's what?" "It's ship, the one in the grove. The Trellians have a word for it, ships that come to rest in your holiest places and let you take care of them while they take care of you. It's a very old word. It means a fly caught in honey." She looked at the porthole. "The kind of thing that looks like it's resting, looks harmless, until you try to pull it free and realize the honey is what it wanted all along." Callum looked at the debris field. 1 rock caught the light and held it for a long second, longer than physics should quite allow, and then it was gone. "What happens to Larais?" he asked. Sierra was quiet for a moment. "The collar is off. What she did while wearing it isn't entirely her fault and isn't entirely not her fault. She made choices before the collar went on, choices about who she would trust, and those choices opened the door. She'll have to live with that. The question is whether she lives with it inside the compact's mercy or outside it." She drank from the mug. "They're a merciful people." "That's not sentiment. I've spent 18 months watching how they handle things that would break a less careful civilization. They'll be merciful. She'll have to do the work of earning back what she gave away." "And Atherin?" "He'll be primary keeper inside a month. He'll spend the rest of his tenure fixing the access vulnerabilities the Vrethic exploited." A small exhale. "He's good at fixing things." Callum thought about the Ascendant, the thing in the old flesh, on its last regeneration, running out of body and running out of time, willing to consume an entire civilization's collective consciousness just to keep going, just to add more years to a life that had long since stopped being worth the cost. He thought about the different kind of stubbornness, the kind that refuses to die because it values itself above everything else it touches, and the kind that refuses to die because there is something left to do. He thought about Sierra Voss catching a thrown device in direct defiance of behavioral suppression, on reflex, on the substrate of a self that the Vrethic algorithm couldn't reach. She hadn't fought her way free. She just caught something someone threw to her, and the catching had been enough. "For the record," he said, "I'm glad the soup worked." "For the record," Sierra said, "it was very bad soup." "It was. There was too much Keth leaf." Eric would disagree. Eric is wrong. She held the mug with both hands. The cortical stabilizer blinked. Outside, the debris field turned in the slow patience of old things that have been there for a long time and will be there for longer. The second bowl was better. Yeah, Callum said. I figured out the ratio. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. There wasn't anything that needed saying. They sat in the corridor with their mugs, and the debris field out the porthole and the ship making its sounds and the ordinary fact of being still here, still breathing, still on the side of the thing that could be fixed rather than the thing that had given up on fixing. After a while, Orvik appeared at the far end of the corridor, retrieved his mug from outside the medbay door, looked at the two of them sitting on the deck and said nothing. He returned to the medbay. The door did not fully close. 3 inches, maybe 4, just enough to let the smell of the kethleaf carry through. Sierra leaned her head back against the bulkhead and closed her eyes. Callum watched the rocks catch light. Outside in the dark, in the turning debris field of a very old collision, each small piece of something that had once been larger went about the patient work of continuing to exist. One light, then another, then another. All of them brief, all of them real, all of them from the right angle worth watching. He'd been briefed on the Vrethic conclave 6 months ago, on a transit layover at the Brethkai relay station above Myra's belt, by a Union intelligence officer named Thessaly, who had the particular affect of someone who had spent too long knowing things they couldn't use. Thessaly had sat across from him in a booth that smelled like engine oil, and showed him a series of files on a handheld display, cycling through them without comment, letting the images do the work. The files were all transitions, power handoffs, moments of institutional succession, the death of a long-serving leader, the retirement of a planetary keeper, the end of a dynasty that had governed for centuries. And in each case the same signature, a person close to the center of power, someone who loved another person in the power structure, making a decision that opened the compound gates. Not corruption, not ideology, just fear, specific and intimate, and a promise that turned out to be a leash. They've done this 47 times in documented history, Thessaly had said, scrolling to a map. Probably 3 or 4 times that in the undocumented. They find civilizations the way a water finds low ground. They flow toward transition, toward the moments when the old protections are weakest. She tapped the map. Coravel is flagged. The compact's current keeper is entering his dissolution cycle. Consul Athrin is the named successor. That means a transition window of approximately 18 months. Callum had looked at the map, at Coravel marked in amber, and the Vrethic will use that window. They're already in position. Our assessment is that they've been running their target selection process inside the compact for at least 2 years. Thessaly had turned off the display. The problem is we don't know who the proxy will be. We know the profile, someone who loves Athrin, someone who fears losing him to the demands of the keepership. But the specific individual could be anyone in his immediate circle. Can we warn Athrin? We've tried. Trellian protocol is very firm about unsolicited intelligence from external parties during a keeper transition. They regard it as an attempt to interfere with their internal succession process. Thessaly had given him a look that contained 6 months of bureaucratic frustration. They will accept a diplomatic liaison team. They will permit that team to provide security consultation if it's requested by a sitting consul. But they will not act on intelligence they didn't ask for. So we need someone inside who can earn the request. Specifically, we need someone who can earn Consul Athrin's trust without appearing to be a security operative, who speaks Trellian at a level sufficient to navigate formal consultation without an interpreter, and who is sufficiently stubborn to maintain their position inside a compact under lockdown if the worst happens. She'd closed the file. We have one candidate. He'd known who before she said the name. Sierra Voss had not wanted the assignment initially. That was a fact she'd told him on the 2nd week of their transit to Coravel, in the ship's small common area, over a card game that neither of them was fully concentrating on. She'd been given the file, read it, and told her handler that she was not a security operative. She was a diplomatic linguist, and the assignment read like someone was trying to dress up an intelligence mission in diplomatic clothes, and she found that professionally disrespectful. Her handler had said, "You're right, that's exactly what it is. Do you want to go or not?" She'd thought about it for a day. Then she'd packed her Keth-Leaf knowledge and her 7-register trillion, and her complete lack of interest in being used as a political instrument, and she'd said yes. "Why?" Callum had asked. She'd been laying down a card, not looking at him. "Because Atherin is genuinely good," she'd said. "I'd read his work, his governance philosophy, his approach to the Trellian bionetwork as a form of collective well-being rather than a power resource." She set the card. "There aren't that many genuinely good people in positions of real power in the sectors I work in. When you find one, you protect them if you can." It was the most direct thing she'd said to him in 14 days of shared transit. He'd filed it away and not commented on it. The way you file away information about someone that tells you more than they probably intended to share. He'd thought about it a lot over the following 18 months. About the specific quality of caring that motivated a person who had no personal stake in Atherin's survival, no political alignment, no career investment, no relationship, to place herself inside a potential danger zone for a year and a half on the basis of because he is genuinely good and those are worth protecting. He'd thought about what the Vrethic would have made of Sira Voss as a target, whether they'd assessed her, whether they'd found the person she loved and the specific fear she carried about losing them and decided they could use it. He'd thought about the fact that they hadn't, that Sira Voss was not, apparently, a useful door. And then he'd thought about why not, and he'd come to a conclusion that he kept mostly to himself, but that seemed relevant. That the Vrethic worked by finding people who loved one specific person and were afraid of losing them, and that this required a love which was in some sense exclusive and possessive, love that regarded the beloved's existence as something it had a stake in controlling. And that Sira Voss's relationship to the things she loved, the genuinely good people, the civilizations worth protecting, the stubborn ongoing work of making things better, was structurally different from that. Not cooler, not less, just differently shaped. She didn't need to control the outcome. She just needed to do the work. The Vrethic had no lever for that. The debriefing with the Union Treaty team lasted 11 hours over 2 days. Callum spent most of the first day in a room with 2 intelligence officers who wanted to understand the counter-frequency emitter, and where Sira had obtained the Vrethic collar specifications, and how she'd known to throw the device rather than use it herself. She answered all of it plainly, in the direct factual register she used when she was being professional. Yes, she'd obtained the collar specs from a contact in the Brethkai biotech research community 6 months before the mission, on the basis of a hunch. No, she hadn't disclosed this to her handler because she hadn't been sure it was relevant. Yes, she understood that was a procedural breach. "Why throw it?" one of the intelligence officers asked. "Because the source access revocation requires the formal keeper's action," she said. Larais was the compact keeper in the record systems. The source responds to her biological signature paired with her intention. If I used the emitter, it freed her from behavioral constraint, but she was still the keeper, and the revocation still had to come from her. She paused. I couldn't do it for her. She had to choose. The throw was a significant risk, if she hadn't caught it. She caught it. If she hadn't, she was going to catch it. Sira met the officer's eyes. I'd watched her for 18 months. She is, under the collar, one of the fastest reacting people I have ever met. She worked with the Fosters for 11 years. Trellian security training involves reflex drills as a core competency. And she was fighting the collar the entire time we were in that chamber. I could see it in her eyes. She was looking for something to do. A small pause. I gave her something to do. The officer wrote something. Callum, sitting in the corner outside the formal interview area, listened. "For the record," the second intelligence officer said, "the counter-throw tactic is not in any standard operational manual." "I know," Sierra said. "I made it up." Both officers looked at her. "The situation required it," she said. "The situation is not always accounted for in the manual." On the third day after the debriefing, when the treaty team had moved its operations to the compact's administrative complex, and Atherin was in the process of formally receiving his keeper's mandate, Callum found Sierra in the ship's galley at 400, standing at the preparation surface with her hands flat on the counter and her eyes on the wall. He didn't say anything. He moved to the far side of the galley, pulled out the remaining real flour packet, the last of the last, and started working. She watched him without speaking. The ship made its sounds. Outside, Coravelle turned in its orbit, and the memory trees stood in the ceremonial grove. And somewhere in the compact's medical facility, Larise was waking up to the first morning in weeks that was entirely her own. "I keep thinking about the collar," Sierra said eventually. "Yeah." "It didn't take her over, that's what I keep coming back to. It constrained her, controlled her actions, but whatever she was underneath was still there, still trying to get out, still present." She pressed her palms flat against the counter. "The Vrethic's technology is designed to suppress and direct, but it can't replace. It can't put something new into the person. It can only work with what's already there and point it in a different direction. Which means the only reason it worked at all is because Larise genuinely wanted to protect Atherin. The collar borrowed that wanting and turned it into a weapon, but the wanting itself was real." She turned to look at him. "You can't make a person into something they're not. You can only exploit something they actually are." He set flour on the counter, water from the reclaim tank, which was not ideal but was what they had. Something that was approximately butter from the protein synthesizer, convincing at a distance. "Is that why the Vrethic couldn't use you?" he asked. "Silence. Thessaly flagged you as the candidate specifically, because you were resistant to leverage." She didn't explain why she assessed that. "I always wondered." Sierra looked at the flour. "They would have needed to find someone I was afraid of losing," she said. "And there are people I'd be afraid to lose. That fear exists, but my relationship to it is different from Larise's." She was quiet for a moment, finding the words. Larise needed Atherin to exist in a specific way. She needed him to be hers, to be present, to be with her rather than consumed by the keepership. Her love had a shape, and the shape was fragile because it depended on a specific future happening. A long pause. "I've never been very good at needing the future to happen in a specific way." "Because you've worked in too many places where it didn't." "Because I've worked in too many places where it didn't," she confirmed. "And still something worth saving came out of it." She looked at the half-assembled dough on the counter. "What are you making?" "Something bread adjacent. The flour situation is not ideal." "You made soup out of a stock cube and dried keth leaf." "I have range," he said. She almost smiled. "All the way this time it got there." "Callum." "Yeah. Thank you for not listening to what I said in the med bay." He kept working the dough. "You said what you needed to say, I heard it. I just also had extra food." "That's a convenient story." "It's the true story." She was quiet for a while. He worked the dough. The galley was warm from the preparation surface and the protein synthesizer's secondary heat output, and the light at 400 was the dim operational amber of systems running without full crew oversight, and it was the most comfortable the ship had felt since before Coravelle. "The thing about the Ascendant," Sierra said, "I keep thinking about it, about what it was doing. It wasn't malicious in the way we usually mean. It wasn't doing it out of cruelty or ideology. It just wanted more life, more time. It had run out of body and run out of options, and it was doing what it had always done, finding the next vessel, taking it, continuing." There's a word for that in 3 languages I know, Callum said. Yeah. None of them are flattering. No, she leaned on the counter. But it's also human in the worst sense. The willingness to take what you need from something else to consume, to put your own continuation above the cost to the thing you're consuming. That's not uniquely alien. That's just the thing we keep having to fight in ourselves. She looked at the dough. The Trellians built a civilization on the opposite principle, mutual sustenance, a shared nervous system. The idea that a keeper's job is not to hold power, but to be a conduit for collective well-being. A pause. And the Ascendant's first move was to try to turn that conduit into a battery for its own use. Which is what every parasite does, Callum said. Finds the thing that's built for giving and tries to make it give to them instead. And when we stopped it, she stopped herself, thought for a moment. When Larai stopped it, when she chose. She pressed a hand to her sternum. That's the HFY part, isn't it? Not that a human defeated an alien, that a person who had been turned into an instrument found the substrate of herself that the instrument hadn't reached, and she caught something thrown to her, and she chose. That's the part, Callum said. He shaped the dough. It wasn't going to be good bread. The flour was months old, and the water was reclaimed, and the approximated butter was going to do something strange when it hit heat. But it was going to be real, and it was going to be warm, and it was going to be here, in this galley on this ship, at 4 in the morning after a very long several days, and that was enough. You're still terrible at this, Sira observed, watching him work. Getting better, he said. Marginally. Marginally is how everything gets better, he said, one bowl at a time. She didn't have an answer to that. He didn't need one. Outside, the debris field caught the first edge of the system's star. Not sunrise, nothing as clean as sunrise, just the geometry of orbit bringing them into a new angle relative to the light. And the rocks that had been dark were briefly, brilliantly alive with reflection, each one its own small moment of brightness, all of them proceeding in their patient arcs, all of them continuing the long, slow work of being present in the universe, of occupying their portion of the dark, of catching the light when it came and not wasting it. The bread, when it came out, was not good. They ate all of it. Atherin's formal investiture as primary keeper of the compact happened on the 5th day after the liberation of the sanctum chamber. Callum wasn't supposed to be there. The ceremony was closed to non-Trellian nationals, a centuries-old protocol about the sanctity of power transfer. But Atherin sent a message the morning of the ceremony through the official consular channel, which was the only channel that reached the ship with full diplomatic weight, and the message said simply, "The second register of your attending would be welcome." Sira translated this for him when he showed her the message. He's inviting you, but he's inviting you as a peer, not a guest. Is that an honor? It means he's considered you and found you the kind of person he wants in the room when things become official. She looked at the message again. The Trellians don't give this to many people who weren't born in the compact. Callum had worn the least damaged jacket he had. He'd let Orvik, who turned out to have strong opinions about formal occasions, apply a field medic's version of presentable to the situation. He'd stood at the back of the chamber, the restored chamber, cleaned of the Ascendant's presence, the source biointerface glowing quiet blue in its proper calibration, and watched a civilization do what civilizations did when they were functioning the way they were supposed to function. Atherin had taken the keeper's crown ring with hands that did not shake. He'd spoken the acceptance oath in the register that had no exact translation, but that Sira had once described as approximately. I am not owning this. I am becoming part of it. He'd looked across the chamber once, briefly, and found Callum's position, and the expression on his face was the same one Callum had seen in the restraint field, the specific stillness of someone in a terrible situation who has just seen something change. Except this time it wasn't change toward crisis. It was change toward something actually working. After, when the formal reception was running in the anteroom, and the Fosters were standing at full formal attention, and the Trellian consuls were moving through the gilded spaces with their layered garments catching the ceremonial light, Atherin had found Callum in the crowd and simply held out his hand. The Trellian gesture for, "This is what we are to each other now." Callum had taken it. "I don't know that I did anything worth this," he said. "You did the thing that needed doing," Atherin said. "In my experience, that is always worth something." His expression was formal but not distant, the specific warmth of someone who had been a consul for many years and had learned to carry feeling and responsibility in the same breath. "How is Liaison Voss?" "Recovering. She'll be back to full function in another week, according to Orvik, who delivers his medical assessments with the enthusiasm of someone who takes them personally." Atherin made the approximate laugh sound. She spoke the third register to Larais in the chamber when she removed the collar. He was quiet for a moment. "The third register is intimate, personal. It requires that you genuinely see the person you're speaking to, that you're not speaking at them or about them but with them." He looked at the crowd. She could have used any register. The technical speech would have worked, but she used the third. "She's been living inside your language for a year and a half," Callum said. "I think she's past technical by now." "No," Atherin said. "Technical is the level at which outsiders stop, even very good outsiders. The third register is not a level, it is a decision." He turned to look at Callum. She decided that Larais deserved to be seen as a person in the worst moment of her life, not as a problem to be solved or a collar to be removed, a person. A pause. That is not something you learn from language training. That is something you either carry or you don't. Callum thought about the medbay door left cracked 3 inches, about soup made from a stock cube and dried leaves, about the ways a person decided to see another person. "She carries a lot of things," he said. "Yes," Atherin said, "I noticed." Larais was released from medical care the same day. Callum heard about it secondhand, through one of the Fosters who had come to the ship to return a piece of communication equipment that had been taken as evidence. The younger Foster, the one who had stood aside at the anteroom entrance, the one who had been afraid and done it anyway, had carried the equipment back personally, which was probably not strictly necessary, and had mentioned before leaving that the consul was doing well, that she had asked about the delegation, that she was going to have a great deal of work to do, and she was apparently looking forward to it. "The consul asked me to tell you," the Foster said, "that she remembers the third register." Callum passed this along to Sira that evening. She was on the observation deck, not a formal observation deck, just a reinforced porthole section of the outer hull that someone had, at some point, bolted a bench to, with her knees drawn up and her cup of the Breathkai stimulant drink in both hands. The cortical stabilizer was still blinking. The orbital fracture was fading from purple to the yellowish green that meant healing was ahead of schedule, which Orvik had noted with professional satisfaction. "Good," she said, when he told her about the third register. "That's all." "That's everything." She was looking out the porthole. "It means she knows she was seen. That matters. When something terrible has happened to you, when you've been used, when you've been the instrument of damage you didn't intend, knowing that someone looked at you and saw a person rather than the damage matters enormously. It doesn't fix anything, but it's the beginning of the path that does." He sat on the bench beside her. Not the whole bench, enough space for both of them, the way the bench had been designed, or at any rate the way it worked out. Outside, Coravel was beginning to pass into its night cycle from this angle, the surface darkening from the orbital perspective, the scattered lights of the compact's inhabited areas becoming visible like a second debris field, warm and deliberate, the evidence of people continuing their lives. "What happens to us now?" he asked. "That depends on what you mean by us. The mission, the team, whether there's a next assignment or whether this one took enough out of it that—" "There's always a next assignment," she said. "The Vrethik have hands in 4 other compact systems. The treaty team found the access logs. There will be a coordinated response effort, and it will need diplomatic support in all 4 systems simultaneously, and the Union doesn't have enough people with the specific profile this work requires. She drank from the cup. Thessaly is going to send me a message in about 48 hours with 4 separate files, all marked urgent, and I'm going to read all of them and prioritize them, and I'm going to have strong professional feelings about the resourcing situation. And I'll probably say yes to at least 2 of them. A pause, maybe 3. And you'll need support staff. She looked at him sideways with the one eye that could look at him fully, the undamaged right eye, direct and clear. Are you applying for a position? I make adequate soup, he said, in adverse conditions. The bread was a setback, but I maintain it was the flour's fault. The flour was not entirely the flour's fault. Some of it was the flour. Some of it was the flour, she allowed. I'm prepared to accept a partial distribution of blame. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the last of Cora Vell's lit side passed out of view, and the planet wore its night, and the memory trees stood in their grove in the ceremonial quarter, their root networks full of accumulated trillion lives, the sediment of all the people who had stood there and lived and passed on and left their residue in the soil for the ones who came after. The Ascendant ship was gone. The treaty team had moved it to a secured location pending full analysis. But the trees were still there, unbothered, their root structures intact, their slow exchange of memory and presence continuing in the dark the way it had for centuries. When Orvik clears you for full field duty, Callum said, and you read the 4 files from Thessaly, and you decide on the assignments I'm in, whatever you need. Soup, backup, someone to hold the counter-frequency emitter while you figure out the throw angle. You were not holding the counter-frequency emitter, she said. I threw it myself. I could have held it. You threw a flash grenade. I threw a flash grenade at the exact right moment, he said. In my estimation. Your estimation is not how we're evaluating this. How are we evaluating it? She looked at the planet in its night. She looked at the bench and the porthole and the cup in her hands. She looked at the evidence of a mission that had gone as badly as it could have gone and then, through specific acts by specific people at specific moments, had come back. By whether everyone is still alive, she said. That's how we're evaluating it. Then it was the exact right moment, he said. A long pause. Yes, she said. It was. They stayed on the bench until the system star came back around and caught the edge of Cora Vell's surface and pulled it out of the dark into morning, and the lights of the inhabited areas faded into the general brightness of a world continuing to exist, and somewhere in the root networks beneath the ceremonial grove, the accumulated weight of Trellian memory lay patient in the dark, keeping its long record of the people who had passed through and what they had made of the time they had. Of keepers and the kept, of power held in trust, of the specific human stubbornness that looks at an ancient predator with 6 centuries of victories behind it and says, not this one, not today, not here. And of dinner made in a galley at the edge of crisis, from inadequate ingredients, for a person who had been offered the option of dying and had decided, for specific reasons, on a different course. The bread had been bad. Everything else had been exactly enough.